The price of pride. Sometimes the greatest wealth isn't in what you own, but in what you learn to let go. Clara Ramirez, a humble and resilient caregiver from the Bronx, has always believed in hard work and staying true to herself. Sebastian Archer, the heir to a global fashion empire, has spent his life guarding his family's legacy and his own pride. But when a fateful encounter leads Sebastian to humiliate Clara at a high society gala, their worlds collide in a way neither could have predicted. Months later, a scandal threatens to destroy the Archer empire, and Sebastian finds himself on the brink of losing everything. Desperate, he reaches out to the last person he thought he'd ever need, Clara. Unbeknownst to him, she holds the key to secrets buried deep in his family's past. But after the way he treated her, why would Clara ever help him? In this emotional roller coaster, Clara and Sebastian must confront their pasts, their pride, and the unspoken truths that link them together. As they navigate betrayal, redemption, and the complexities of forgiveness, they discover that the real fight isn't just for power or legacy. It's for the courage to tear down the walls pride has built around their hearts. Will Clara forgive Sebastian and help him restore his family's legacy, or will her discovery of a dark family secret shatter their worlds forever? The sun barely broke through the small window of the cramped two-bedroom apartment in the Bronx, casting a soft glow on the worn-out furniture. Clara Ramirez, 28, pulled her long dark hair into a loose ponytail as she stood at the kitchen counter, preparing breakfast. The air was filled with the comforting scent of coffee and eggs, but beneath the homey atmosphere, the weight of responsibility pressed on her shoulders. She glanced at the clock, 6 a.m. Time moved too quickly when she had a sick father and a teenage brother depending on her. Her father's illness had drained most of their savings, and Diego, her 17-year-old brother, needed her emotional and financial support as he navigated his last year of high school. "Morning, Clara," Diego mumbled as he shuffled into the kitchen, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. His hair was a mess, and his oversized t-shirt hung loosely on his lanky frame. "Morning, sleepyhead." "Eat up, you've got school," Clara replied, handing him a plate. He eyed her for a moment, noticing the dark circles under her eyes. "You didn't sleep much, did you?" She shrugged, forcing a smile. "Same as usual." Diego didn't push further. Instead, he silently ate his breakfast. The familiar silence between them felt comfortable yet heavy, like an unspoken understanding of the struggles they both carried. As she cleared the dishes, her phone buzzed on the counter. Clara glanced at the screen and frowned slightly. It was from the volunteer coordinator at the nursing home, asking if she could help out at a charity gala later that evening. The gala wasn't exactly her thing, but extra work meant extra money. "You think you'll be okay with Dad tonight?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Diego nodded. "I'll take care of him. Go, it'll be good for you." Clara sighed, knowing she didn't have much of a choice. Her financial worries didn't allow for much downtime. With a quick kiss on Diego's forehead and a final glance at her father's bedroom door, she grabbed her jacket, ready to face the day. Across the city, at the top of the towering Archer Tower in Manhattan, Sebastian Archer stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. The 35-year-old billionaire's chiseled features reflected back at him in the glass as he watched the busy streets below, far removed from the struggles of everyday people like Clara. His tailored suit was immaculate, his dark hair carefully styled, and his sharp blue eyes looked down on the city like a king surveying his kingdom. His father's voice echoed in the background, sharp and insistent. "Sebastian, this is unacceptable." Victor Archer's voice cut through the silence. "The business is slipping. We need to secure these investors, or everything I've built will crumble." Sebastian turned away from the window to face his father. Victor's aging face was a mask of cold authority, his silver hair slicked back with precision. The weight of the Archer legacy bore down on Sebastian, as it always had. For years, he had been groomed to carry on the family empire, a fashion conglomerate that defined luxury, wealth, and power. But the cracks were beginning to show. "I'll handle it," Sebastian replied, his voice devoid of emotion. His pride wouldn't allow him to show the anxiety gnawing at his insides. "Tonight's gala is crucial," Victor pressed. "Make sure you're there, and make sure you make an impression. Investors need to be reassured." Sebastian nodded, though inside he felt a simmering resentment. His father's expectations, the constant need to prove himself, it all felt like a cage closing in. But there was no room for weakness. Not in the Archer family. As Victor left the office, Sebastian loosened his tie and took a breath. Tonight, the gala would be just another performance. Another mask to wear. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel gleamed under the soft light of chandeliers, the gold accents and luxurious decor a testament to the wealth of the guests in attendance. Clara stepped cautiously into the sea of elite faces, balancing a tray of champagne glasses. She felt entirely out of place in her simple black dress, a borrowed uniform for the evening's event. She scanned the crowd, careful to avoid eye contact. To them, she was invisible, a server, just part of the background of their opulent lives. But it didn't bother her much. She was here to work, to get paid, and to leave. In stark contrast, Sebastian strode into the ballroom with the confidence of a man who belonged. He barely glanced at the extravagant surroundings. This was his world, after all. He made his way through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with high-profile investors, his mind already calculating the night's possibilities. Clara, carrying a tray of drinks, moved quickly through the crowd, but in her haste, she accidentally brushed against Sebastian. The tray tipped slightly, and a glass of red wine tumbled from its perch, splashing across the sleeve of Sebastian's expensive suit. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," Clara gasped, setting the tray down and reaching for a napkin. Sebastian froze, his piercing blue eyes narrowing in irritation as he looked down at the stain spreading across his sleeve. Sebastian's patience was thin, and the embarrassment of the moment, paired with the pressure of the night, broke through his carefully crafted facade. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" he snapped, his voice cold and cutting. Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks as guests around them turned to watch. She quickly handed him a napkin, trying to contain the panic bubbling inside her. "I'm really sorry, it was an accident." "Of course it was," Sebastian interrupted, brushing her off. "But that doesn't change the fact that you've ruined it." His voice carried a cruel edge, the kind that could only come from someone who had never had to worry about money or consequences. The humiliation washed over Clara like a wave. The room felt too big, too bright, and every eye was on her. But she forced herself to remain calm, fighting back the hurt as she turned and walked away, her pride barely intact. As she disappeared into the back corridors of the hotel, Sebastian stood there, the napkin in his hand, his anger slowly fading as the reality of his actions set in. He had lashed out, humiliated someone who didn't deserve it. In the quiet of the hotel's staff room, Clara sat at a small table, her hands still trembling from the encounter. She stared at the floor, letting the weight of the evening settle on her. But instead of tears, a surge of determination welled up inside her. She had been humiliated, yes, but she would not be broken. She thought of Diego, of her father, of all the responsibilities waiting for her at home. They needed her strength, not her sorrow. Clara straightened in her seat, her resolve hardening. This world of wealth and arrogance might be where people like Sebastian Archer thrived, but she wouldn't let them define her. She would rise above it. Just as she stood to leave, her phone buzzed. She frowned as she read the unknown number on the screen, debating whether to answer. Curiosity got the better of her. "Hello?" she answered, her voice steady. "Ms. Ramirez? I believe we need to talk," a male voice responded, calm but with an underlying tension. "It's about your mother and the Archer family." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She gripped the phone tighter, the words pulling her back into a world she thought she had left behind. A world filled with secrets, legacy, and decisions she couldn't escape. As the call ended, Clara stared at the phone in her hand, her mind racing. Everything was about to change, and she would need more than resolve to face what was coming. Clara stood frozen in the dimly lit staff room, gripping her phone tightly. The voice on the other end had spoken with unsettling calm. The name Archer echoed in her mind, and her thoughts immediately went to the humiliating encounter with Sebastian just moments ago. But the voice had mentioned her mother. What could her mother possibly have to do with the Archer family? Her heart raced, and 1,000 questions filled her mind, but she forced herself to stay composed. She took a deep breath and responded, her voice sharper than intended. "What do you mean? What does my mother have to do with the Archers?" Clara demanded, pacing the small room. There was a pause on the other end, and then the voice spoke again, measured and cautious. "I'm not at liberty to explain everything over the phone, but I can tell you this. The Archer family owes a great deal to your mother, and I believe you deserve to know the truth." Clara's heart skipped. What debt could such a powerful family owe to someone like her mother? Her mother, who had worked hard her entire life, scraping by to give her and Diego a decent life? And now, bedridden by illness? "Who is this?" Clara asked, her patience slipping. "I don't even know who you are. Why should I trust anything you're saying?" "Meet me tomorrow at 2 p.m. at the Archer Foundation office. My name is Marcus, and I can assure you, what I have to say will change everything." The call ended abruptly, leaving Clara staring at her phone, her heart thudding in her chest. She was torn between suspicion and curiosity, but one thing was clear. She couldn't ignore the mention of her mother. She had to find out what this was about. The sound of clinking glasses and light conversation filled the grand ballroom as the gala continued, oblivious to the turmoil brewing in Sebastian Archer's mind. He sat at a corner table, swirling his untouched glass of whiskey as the memory of the encounter with Clara replayed in his mind. The look in her eyes when he lashed out at her. It was a look he couldn't shake. He sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. Humiliating a complete stranger wasn't his style, and now the guilt weighed heavily on him. He could hear his father's voice in his head, reminding him that appearances mattered more than emotions. That image was everything, and weakness was not tolerated. But Clara wasn't just anyone. He had seen something in her eyes, pride, perhaps, resilience, qualities that weren't often found in his social circle, where everyone smiled on the surface but hid their true selves underneath. As he brooded, his assistant Marcus appeared at his side, his expression serious. Marcus leaned in close, speaking in a low voice. "Sebastian, we have a problem." Sebastian barely acknowledged him, eyes still fixed on his glass. "What now?" "It's about Clara Ramirez," Marcus said, his voice just above a whisper. Sebastian's head snapped up at the mention of her name. "What about her?" "I did some digging, per your father's request. It turns out her mother was once connected to the Archer family. I don't have all the details yet, but there's something significant. I thought you should know." Sebastian frowned, his irritation growing. "What does any of this have to do with me? Or the company?" "I don't know yet, but I've arranged a meeting with her tomorrow at the Foundation's office." Sebastian narrowed his eyes. "And you didn't think to ask me first?" Marcus straightened, sensing Sebastian's rising frustration. "I was trying to get ahead of it. It's best to deal with these things quietly." Sebastian pushed his chair back, standing abruptly. "You have no idea what you're meddling with, Marcus. I'll deal with this personally." The next day, Clara arrived at the Archer Foundation office with a mix of nerves and curiosity. The sleek, modern building stood tall, its glass exterior gleaming in the midday sun. She had never set foot in a place like this, and her unease was palpable. Her mother had never mentioned anything about the Archers. What could this be about? As she entered the lobby, she was greeted by a receptionist who directed her to a private conference room on the third floor. The plush carpet and minimalist decor only heightened Clara's feeling of being out of place. When she stepped inside the room, she was surprised to see not just Marcus, but Sebastian sitting at the head of the long conference table. He looked every bit the wealthy heir, confident, composed, and utterly unreadable. For a moment, Clara hesitated. The memory of his sharp words from the night before was still fresh in her mind. But she wasn't here for Sebastian. She was here for answers. "Ms. Ramirez, thank you for coming," Marcus said, gesturing for her to take a seat. Clara sat down, her eyes never leaving Sebastian's. "What's this about?" Sebastian's gaze was steady, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of regret, perhaps. He didn't say anything at first, letting Marcus do the talking. "Your mother," Marcus began, "was once employed by the Archer family. Years ago, she worked closely with Sebastian's father on several philanthropic projects through the foundation. But there's more to the story." Clara's brows furrowed. My mother never told me she worked for the Archers. She wouldn't have, Marcus continued, his tone careful. Her work was important, but it was behind the scenes. The truth is, her contributions helped save the Archer Foundation from a serious financial crisis. Sebastian finally spoke, his voice softer than Clara expected. She was a key part of our team. My father trusted her. But something happened, something that caused a rift between them. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. What do you mean? What happened? Marcus and Sebastian exchanged a glance before Marcus continued. It's unclear. The records are sealed, but it's believed that your mother was involved in something that affected the family's financial standing. Victor Archer, well, let's just say he didn't handle it well. Clara's mind raced, trying to process the information. Her mother had been involved with the Archers? And now, years later, that past was somehow connected to the family's current issues? I need to speak to her, Clara said, her voice firm. I need to know what really happened. Sebastian leaned forward, his gaze intense. We both do. That evening, Clara returned to her apartment, her mind still swirling from the meeting. She had told Sebastian and Marcus that she would speak to her mother, but in truth, she didn't know where to start. Her mother's condition had deteriorated in recent months, and Clara wasn't sure if she would even remember the events Marcus and Sebastian had spoken of. Diego was sitting at the kitchen table, sketching in his notebook when Clara walked in. He looked up, noticing the tension in her expression. You okay? He asked, setting down his pencil. Clara sighed, leaning against the counter. I don't know. Something strange came up today. Something about Mom's past. Diego frowned. What do you mean? Clara hesitated, unsure how much to tell him. Apparently, she worked for the Archer family a long time ago. They say she was involved in something big, something that changed the course of their business. Diego's eyes widened. Mom? Are you serious? Clara nodded, but before she could say more, their father's weak voice called out from the bedroom. Clara? Diego? She rushed to his side, gently helping him sit up in bed. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. Clara's heart ached at the sight of him like this, but she forced a smile. I'm here, Dad, she said softly. Everything's okay. But it wasn't. Nothing about this situation was okay. As she sat by her father's side, her thoughts drifted back to her mother and the secrets buried in her past. Tomorrow, she would visit her mother at the care facility. She needed answers, answers that only her mother could provide. The next day, Clara found herself standing outside her mother's room at the care facility, her heart heavy with apprehension. She hadn't told her mother about her meeting with the Archers, and now, standing at the threshold of the room, she wasn't sure how to bring it up. She knocked softly and entered the room. Her mother lay in bed, her frail form almost lost beneath the covers. Her eyes, though tired, brightened when she saw Clara. Hi, Mom, Clara said, sitting beside her. How are you feeling? Her mother smiled weakly. Better, now that you're here. Clara hesitated, unsure how to approach the topic. Mom, I need to ask you something. About the Archer family. The mention of the name made her mother's expression change, a shadow of something. Regret, maybe, flickering in her eyes. Why are you asking about them? Her mother asked, her voice suddenly guarded. Clara took a deep breath. I met Sebastian Archer. He and his assistant told me that you used to work for them, that you were involved in something important, something big. Her mother closed her eyes, a deep sigh escaping her lips. That was a long time ago, Clara, and some things are better left buried. Clara leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. Mom, I need to know the truth. What happened? Her mother opened her eyes again, and for a moment, Clara saw the pain of the past reflected in them. Her mother reached out, taking Clara's hand in hers. The Archers, they were once like family to me, her mother whispered, her voice barely audible. But I made a mistake that cost them more than they'll ever admit. Clara's heart pounded. What did you do? Her mother's grip tightened on her hand. I betrayed them. Clara's world tilted as the words left her mother's lips. I betrayed them. She gripped her mother's frail hand tightly, her pulse racing as she stared into the tired, guilt-ridden eyes that had always been so strong, so reliable. Clara swallowed hard. What do you mean? What kind of betrayal? Her mother closed her eyes, breathing deeply as if summoning the courage to speak. When she opened them again, there was a heaviness in her voice. Years ago, I was entrusted with something very valuable to the Archer family. It was more than just money. It was their future, and I failed them. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. You've never talked about this before. Why? Because, Clara, I wanted to protect you and Diego. It's a story filled with mistakes, ones I've regretted every day since. When I started working for the Archers, they treated me like family. But there was pressure, too. They trusted me to oversee donations and manage the foundation's funds. But I got involved with the wrong people. Clara leaned closer, needing to understand. What happened? Her mother's face crumpled with pain. I was tricked. A man I thought I loved convinced me to invest some of the Archer Foundation's money in a scheme that he said would double their donations. I thought I was doing something good, but the money vanished and the man disappeared. Victor Archer was furious, and rightfully so. They had to cover up the losses, and they let me go quietly. I've carried the guilt ever since. Clara was stunned, her emotions swirling in a storm of disbelief and empathy. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell anyone? Her mother sighed deeply. What would that have accomplished? The Archers saved face, and I was lucky they didn't press charges. I couldn't drag you and Diego into it. I thought it was better if it all stayed buried. Clara's mind raced. This revelation painted everything in a new light. Her mother's decision to stay silent, the distance between their family and the Archers, and the mysterious connection to Sebastian's father. But why would they bring it up now? Clara asked, her voice a mixture of confusion and urgency. After all these years, why does this matter to them now? Her mother shook her head weakly. I don't know, but if they've reached out to you, then something must be going on. Be careful, Clara. The Archers, they don't forget easily. After leaving her mother's side, Clara's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Betrayal, guilt, fear. She hadn't expected this. Her mother had always been her rock, the one who held everything together, and now the revelation of her involvement in the Archer family's downfall changed everything. As Clara walked home, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Sebastian. We need to talk. Meet me tonight at Archer Tower. 7 p.m. She stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, staring at the message. A part of her wanted to avoid Sebastian altogether, to walk away from this tangled mess before it got worse. But another part, the part that had grown more curious after learning her mother's story, knew she couldn't ignore this. Sebastian deserved to know the truth, and she needed answers too. By the time Clara returned home, Diego was sitting on the couch with his laptop, his focus split between schoolwork and his growing curiosity about their mother's connection to the Archer family. He looked up as Clara entered the room, concern etched across his face. Did Mom say anything? Diego asked. Clara nodded slowly, sitting beside him. She told me everything, or at least, everything she could remember. Diego's eyes widened. What does that mean? What did she do? Clara sighed, her voice soft. She made a mistake, Diego. She got involved with someone who tricked her into losing a lot of money. Money that belonged to the Archers. Diego's mouth dropped open. Mom? But she would never do that. She didn't mean to, Clara explained, resting a hand on his shoulder. She thought she was doing something good, but it ended badly, and the Archers had to cover for her. Diego slumped back on the couch, the weight of the revelation sinking in. So that's why we never heard about it? Clara nodded. She kept it from us to protect us. Diego shook his head in disbelief. And now the Archers are back? What do they want? Clara hesitated before answering. That's what I'm going to find out. Later that evening, Clara stood in front of Archer Tower, her heart pounding as she looked up at the gleaming skyscraper. The building represented everything about Sebastian's world: wealth, power, and privilege. A world she didn't belong to. She steeled herself, walked into the sleek lobby, and was quickly escorted to the top floor by a security guard. The elevator ride felt like it took an eternity, the anticipation building with each passing second. When the doors finally opened, Sebastian was there, waiting. He looked different, less composed than usual, his suit slightly disheveled and his expression serious. As she stepped out, their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "Clara," he said finally, his voice low, "thank you for coming." She nodded, her arms crossed protectively. "You said we needed to talk?" Sebastian gestured to a small sitting area by the windows, offering her a seat. Clara reluctantly sat down, the tension between them thick. "I found out about your mother," Sebastian began, his tone steady but cautious. "Marcus told me what happened, but I want to hear your side of the story." Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. "You want my side?" "My mother was tricked, Sebastian. She made a mistake. But the Archers, your family, buried it, and she's been living with that guilt for years." Sebastian ran a hand through his hair, sighing heavily. "I know. I didn't know about any of this until recently. But now, there's something happening with the Foundation. Financial inconsistencies. My father's been on edge, and I think it has something to do with what happened all those years ago." Clara leaned forward, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "So what do you want from me, Sebastian? What does this have to do with me?" "I don't know yet," he admitted, his voice softer. "But I think our families are more connected than we realize. And I don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past." Clara stared at him for a long moment, searching for any sign of manipulation. But for the first time, she saw something different in him. He wasn't the arrogant man from the gala. He was someone who, like her, was trapped in a web of family secrets. "Fine," Clara said, standing up. "I'll help you figure this out. But I'm not doing it for you, Sebastian. I'm doing it for my mother." Sebastian nodded, standing as well. "I understand." But as they left the tower, both Clara and Sebastian knew that uncovering the truth would come with a price, and it was one neither of them were fully prepared to pay. As Clara and Sebastian descended the elevator, Marcus was waiting for them in the lobby, his expression unreadable. He nodded in acknowledgement as they approached, but there was an air of tension between him and Sebastian that Clara couldn't ignore. "I've arranged a meeting with some of the key figures who were involved in the Foundation's financial dealings back then," Marcus said, glancing at Clara. "We need to tread carefully." Clara arched an eyebrow. "Why is everyone so nervous about the past? What are you not telling me?" Sebastian hesitated before answering. "The Archer family's public image is everything. And my father, he's not someone who easily lets go of the past. If anything comes to light that tarnishes the Archer name, he won't hesitate to shut it down, even if it means going after your family." Clara's stomach churned with a mixture of anger and fear. "So what do we do?" Marcus cleared his throat, stepping in. "We find the truth, quietly, and we make sure no one gets hurt." Clara met Sebastian's eyes, her voice firm. "I don't care about your family's reputation, Sebastian. I care about the truth. For my mother's sake." Sebastian's gaze softened. "And I care about the truth, too. For all of us." Later that night, Clara sat in her small apartment, the weight of everything pressing down on her. The revelations, the secrets, the tangled history between their families. It all felt too overwhelming. But she knew she couldn't back down now. She had to see this through. Her phone buzzed on the table, and she picked it up to see a message from Sebastian. "Meet me at the Foundation office tomorrow. We're going to dig into the old records." Clara's pulse quickened. They were about to uncover the truth. But something inside her whispered that once they did, there would be no turning back. She placed the phone down and glanced at the photo of her mother on the wall. "I'll find out what happened, Mom," she whispered to herself. "I promise." Clara stood in the dimly lit records room of the Archer Foundation. The shelves were lined with old files, folders, and papers, thick with dust and time. It felt almost surreal that the truth, everything about her mother's past, was stored somewhere in this room. She and Sebastian were standing shoulder to shoulder, rifling through documents and ledgers, their faces tight with focus. "We should start by looking at the financial reports from the year everything happened," Sebastian said, pulling out a thick binder labeled 2001 to 2002. Clara nodded, her fingers trembling slightly as she flipped through the files in front of her. The stale air in the room weighed heavily on her chest, and the smell of old paper made her feel dizzy. She was desperate for answers, but she feared what she might find. After a few minutes of silent searching, Sebastian paused, tapping his fingers on a particular page. Here, he said quietly, pointing to a set of figures. This is when the money started going missing. It's not obvious, but if you compare the numbers to the previous year, it's clear something was off. Clara looked over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the numbers. That's a lot of money. And my mother was responsible for it? Sebastian nodded grimly. She was in charge of the foundation's donations. But according to my father's notes, there were other people involved, donors, partners, people we haven't even considered yet. Clara's heart pounded as she considered the scope of the betrayal. Do you think someone else could have set her up? I mean, she made a mistake, but she wasn't a thief. Sebastian glanced at her, his brow furrowed. It's possible. I've always believed my father kept secrets, even from me. And if your mother was manipulated, then someone higher up could have been pulling the strings. Just then, Marcus walked in, his expression grave. I found something, he said, holding up a folder. It's a list of the people your mother was working with during that time. Some of these names, I've seen them recently. They're still active in the business world. Clara's pulse quickened. Do you think they're connected to what's happening now? Marcus handed the folder to Sebastian. It's worth looking into. One name in particular stands out, Henry Beckman. Sebastian's face darkened. Beckman? He's an old family friend. If he's involved, Clara's stomach twisted. Then this goes deeper than just my mother's mistake. Sebastian sighed, closing the folder. It seems like we're not the only ones with secrets. The next day, Clara, Sebastian, and Marcus sat around a table at a quiet cafe. They had spent hours going through the files, piecing together bits of information, but there were still so many gaps. The name Henry Beckman kept coming up, but every time they thought they had a lead, it led to another dead end. Clara sipped her coffee, her mind spinning with the weight of everything. If Beckman was involved, why didn't anyone suspect him back then? Because he was too close to my father, Sebastian said, his jaw tight. He was like a second father to me growing up. He wouldn't have been questioned. And if he was behind any of this, he would have made sure there was no trace. Marcus, who had been silent for most of the conversation, cleared his throat. There's one more thing. I've been looking into Beckman's recent business dealings, and something odd came up. He's been making large donations to the Archer Foundation over the past few years. Donations that don't match up with any of the public records. Sebastian frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying, Marcus continued carefully, that Beckman may be laundering money through the foundation. And if that's true, then he's been using your family's name to cover his tracks. Clara felt her heart drop. That's why this is all coming up now. Someone's onto him, and they're trying to bring everything to light. Sebastian sat back, running a hand through his hair. If Beckman is involved in something illegal, it could ruin my family. My father's legacy, everything. Clara leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. Sebastian, I get it. This is your family. But if Beckman's the one who manipulated my mother into making that mistake, we have to expose him, no matter what it costs. Sebastian looked at her, his eyes conflicted. I know, but we have to be careful. Beckman's powerful. If he finds out we're onto him, Marcus nodded in agreement. He could make things very difficult for all of us. Clara clenched her fists, the weight of her mother's betrayal and the looming threat of Beckman settling heavily on her shoulders. We need proof. Something concrete that ties him to everything. Sebastian glanced at Marcus. Do you think you can get access to his financial records? Something that shows where the money's going? Marcus nodded slowly. I can try, but it won't be easy. Beckman's careful. He's not the kind of man who leaves a trail. Clara stood up, determination in her eyes. Then we make sure there's no way he can hide. A few days later, Clara found herself standing outside the opulent gates of Henry Beckman's estate. Sebastian had insisted that they confront Beckman together, though Clara wasn't sure how this would play out. Beckman was powerful, rich, and ruthless. If he was responsible for manipulating her mother, then he had to be held accountable. Sebastian rang the bell, and after a few tense moments, the gates swung open. They were led inside by a housekeeper, and soon they found themselves in a grand sitting room where Beckman himself waited. The man was in his 60s, tall and well-dressed, with sharp eyes that gleamed with intelligence. He greeted Sebastian with a warm smile, but when his gaze shifted to Clara, there was a flicker of something cold in his eyes. "Sebastian, it's good to see you," Beckman said smoothly. "And who's this?" Sebastian didn't waste time with pleasantries. "This is Clara Ramirez. Her mother used to work for the Archer Foundation." Beckman's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Ah, yes. I remember her. A hard worker, if I recall." Clara's anger simmered beneath the surface, but she forced herself to remain calm. "She made a mistake. A mistake that you may have had something to do with." Beckman's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm not sure I understand." Sebastian stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "We know about the money, Beckman. The donations. The missing funds. We know you've been using the foundation to cover up your own dealings." Beckman's expression hardened, but he remained composed. "I suggest you be very careful with your accusations, Sebastian. I've been a loyal friend to your family for years. I would hate to see you make a mistake that could cost you." Clara's heart pounded, but she refused to back down. "My mother trusted you, and you used her. You made her believe she was doing something good, and then you let her take the fall." Beckman's gaze shifted to Clara, his eyes cold and calculating. "Your mother made her own choices, Miss Ramirez. I had nothing to do with it." Sebastian clenched his fists, his voice sharp. "Don't lie to us, Beckman. We have enough to expose you. If you don't come clean, we'll go public with everything." Beckman's face remained impassive, but there was a flicker of something dark in his eyes. "You're making a grave mistake, Sebastian." Sebastian met his gaze, unflinching. "No, you did." As Clara and Sebastian left Beckman's estate, the tension between them was palpable. The confrontation had been intense, and though Beckman hadn't admitted to anything, they both knew they were close to uncovering the truth. "That man," Clara said, her voice shaky with anger. "He's hiding something. I know it." Sebastian nodded, his face grim. "We need proof. Real proof. We're too close to back down now." Clara glanced at him, her voice softening. "Are you sure about this? If we expose Beckman, it could ruin your family." Sebastian's gaze softened as he looked at her. "I'm sure. My father built this foundation to help people. I won't let Beckman destroy that. And I won't let him ruin your mother's name any longer." Clara felt a surge of gratitude. For all their differences, Sebastian was standing by her, determined to see this through. "We'll get through this," she said quietly. "Together." That evening, back at Sebastian's office, Marcus burst into the room, his face alight with urgency. "I found something," he said, holding up a stack of documents. "Beckman's been funneling money through shell companies for years. It's all here, proof that he's been using the foundation to hide his dirty dealings." Clara and Sebastian exchanged a look of shock and triumph. "This is it," Clara said, her voice trembling with emotion. "This is what we needed." Sebastian nodded, his expression serious. "Now we take him down." But as they stared at the papers in Marcus's hands, they knew that the battle was far from over. Beckman wouldn't go down without a fight. Clara, Sebastian, and Marcus gathered around the stack of documents on the table in Sebastian's office. The proof was there, in black and white. Henry Beckman had been using the Archer Foundation as a front for his money laundering for years. But as they stared at the damning evidence, the weight of what they were about to do pressed heavily on them. "Are we really ready for this?" Clara asked, her voice tense. "Beckman is powerful. Exposing him won't just be a scandal. It could destroy everything." Sebastian rubbed the back of his neck, his expression serious. "I know, but we can't let this slide. If we don't do something, Beckman will keep manipulating people like your mother. And the foundation, it'll be ruined." Marcus leaned forward, his voice calm but urgent. "We need a plan. Beckman's not going to sit idly by if we move against him. He'll fight back." Clara swallowed hard. "So how do we do it? How do we bring this to light without getting crushed in the process?" Sebastian stood, pacing the room. "We need to go public. If we take this straight to the media, Beckman won't be able to hide. But we have to make sure we have everything lined up. Documents, statements, everything. Otherwise, he'll bury us in lawsuits." Clara nodded, determination settling in her chest. Then let's do it. For my mother. For your family. We have to end this. The next morning, Clara and Sebastian found themselves standing outside Archer Manor, the grand estate where Sebastian's father, Victor Archer, resided. They needed to tell him what they'd uncovered before going public. Clara knew this was going to be the hardest part, convincing Victor to turn on his old friend. As they walked up the steps, Clara glanced at Sebastian. "Do you think your father will listen?" Sebastian's face was unreadable. "I don't know. My father's always been loyal to Beckman. But once he sees the evidence, he won't be able to ignore it." They were ushered inside by a housekeeper and led into Victor's private study. The room was a testament to old money, with leather-bound books lining the walls and antique furniture polished to perfection. Victor Archer sat behind his massive oak desk, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of his son and Clara. "Sebastian," Victor said, his tone neutral but cautious. "What's this about? Why are you here with her?" Sebastian took a deep breath, stepping forward. "Dad, there's something you need to know. Something about Henry Beckman." Victor's face hardened at the mention of Beckman's name, but he remained silent, waiting for Sebastian to continue. "We've uncovered evidence," Sebastian said, placing the documents on the desk in front of his father. "Beckman's been laundering money through the foundation for years. He manipulated Clara's mother into covering for him, and he's been using the Archer name to hide his tracks." Victor's eyes darkened as he glanced at the papers, but his expression remained controlled. "You're accusing a man who's been a friend to this family for decades, Sebastian. This is serious." "I know it is," Sebastian replied, his voice firm, "but it's true. And if we don't do something, the foundation will be destroyed. Everything you've built will fall apart." Victor stood, walking around the desk to face his son. "And what do you suggest we do? Destroy Beckman? Ruin our reputation in the process?" Clara, feeling the tension rise, stepped forward. "Mr. Archer, my mother trusted Beckman. She thought she was helping your family. But he betrayed her. He betrayed all of us." Victor looked at her, his eyes cold. "And what do you want from me, Miss Ramirez? Justice for your mother? Or revenge?" Clara's heart pounded in her chest. "I want the truth to come out. I want Beckman to pay for what he did." Victor turned back to his son, his voice low and dangerous. "This will tear everything apart, Sebastian. You understand that?" Sebastian's gaze was unwavering. "I do, but it's the right thing to do." Victor stared at his son for a long moment, the tension between them thick and heavy. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping ever so slightly. "Very well," Victor said quietly. "Do what you have to do. But know this, Sebastian. Once you start down this path, there's no turning back." Later that evening, Clara and Sebastian sat in the office of a well-known investigative journalist, a woman named Lisa Carrington. She had a reputation for exposing corruption, and they knew she was the right person to help them bring Beckman down. Lisa scanned the documents in front of her, her brow furrowed in concentration. After what felt like an eternity, she looked up, her eyes sharp. "This is big," Lisa said, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and caution. "If this gets out, it'll be a massive scandal. Beckman won't be able to recover from this. But you both need to be prepared for the fallout. He's not going to go down quietly." Clara exchanged a glance with Sebastian. "We're ready," she said, her voice steady. "We have to do this." Lisa nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I admire your courage. We'll start the story with the foundation's finances and your mother's involvement. Once we have Beckman's reaction, we'll hit him with the money laundering evidence." Sebastian leaned forward, his voice serious. "How long until it goes live?" Lisa glanced at her watch. "We'll have the story out by tomorrow morning. Beckman's world will come crashing down soon after." Clara felt a surge of both fear and relief. The truth was about to come out, and once it did, everything would change. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. News outlets blasted the story across every platform. Henry Beckman, a well-known philanthropist and businessman, had been exposed for laundering money through the Archer Foundation. Clara's mother was mentioned as a key figure in the past scandal, but it was clear from the article that she had been manipulated by Beckman. As Clara sat in her apartment, watching the news unfold on the TV, Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends and colleagues. Diego, her brother, sat beside her, his eyes wide with shock. "Clara, this is huge," Diego said, his voice filled with awe. "You actually did it. You brought him down." Clara nodded, her heart racing. "I didn't do it alone. Sebastian and Marcus, we all did this together." Diego looked at her, pride shining in his eyes. "Mom would be proud of you, Clara. You fought for her." Clara smiled, though the weight of the situation still pressed heavily on her. "I hope so." Just then, her phone rang, and when she saw Sebastian's name on the screen, she quickly answered. "Clara, it's happening," Sebastian said, his voice filled with both urgency and relief. "Beckman's already making moves to cover his tracks, but it's too late. The media is all over him." Clara sighed in relief. "What about your family? How's your father handling this?" Sebastian paused for a moment before replying. "He's quiet. I think he's processing everything. He's known Beckman for so long. This betrayal runs deep." Clara's chest tightened. "I'm sorry, Sebastian. I know this is hard." Sebastian's voice softened. "It's not your fault. We did the right thing." As Clara hung up the phone, she felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and uncertainty. The truth was out, but what would come next? How would Beckman respond? And would her mother's name finally be cleared? 2 days later, Clara stood outside the Archer Foundation building, her heart heavy with the weight of everything that had transpired. The media frenzy had only grown since the story broke, and Beckman had gone into hiding, refusing to make any public statements. Sebastian joined her, his face a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "It's done," he said quietly. "Beckman's been officially removed from the foundation board. He'll be facing criminal charges soon." Clara nodded, though the victory felt bittersweet. "What about your family?" Sebastian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "My father's still reeling from the fallout, but he knows we did the right thing. It's going to take time, but we'll rebuild." Clara turned to him, her voice soft. "Thank you, Sebastian, for standing by me, for helping me fight for my mother." Sebastian met her gaze, his eyes filled with warmth. "You didn't need me to fight. You've been strong all along." Clara smiled, a sense of peace finally settling over her. "Maybe, but I'm glad we did this together." As they stood in the shadow of the building, watching the city buzz with life around them, Clara knew that the hardest part of the journey was behind her. The truth had been exposed, justice was on its way, and her mother's legacy had been restored. But there was still a long road ahead, and with Sebastian by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. The aftermath of Beckman's exposure was still unfolding, but for the first time in weeks, Clara felt a sense of relief. She sat in the living room of her apartment, staring out the window as the late afternoon sun bathed the Bronx in a golden glow. It was quiet, unusually quiet. For the first time in a long while, the constant weight of the investigation was gone. Diego sat across from her, watching her closely. "So, what now?" Clara smiled faintly, her mind still processing everything that had happened. "I'm not sure. Part of me still can't believe it's over. Beckman's being investigated, and the foundation is being restructured. But, I don't know. It feels like there's still more to do." Diego shrugged. "You fought for Mom. You did everything you could to clear her name. I think she'd be proud." Clara's smile widened a little. "I hope so. I just wish she could have seen this." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Diego spoke again. "You've been spending a lot of time with that Sebastian guy." Clara glanced at her brother, raising an eyebrow. "What are you getting at?" Diego grinned. "Nothing. Just saying, he seems like a good guy. And you seem to like him." Clara's face flushed slightly as she tried to hide her smile. "It's not like that, Diego. We've been working together, that's all." "Right," Diego said, his grin widening. "You just happened to get close while taking down a corrupt millionaire." Classic love story. Clara rolled her eyes, but there was no denying the way her heart fluttered when she thought about Sebastian. They had been through so much together, and despite their differences, they had formed a bond that was hard to ignore. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Sebastian. "Meet me at the foundation?" There's something you need to see. Clara's heart skipped a beat. I have to go, she said, grabbing her jacket. Sebastian wants to meet. Diego raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, just giving her a knowing smile as she left the apartment. Clara arrived at the Archer Foundation, the weight of the moment settling over her. The building had become a symbol of both her mother's downfall and her fight for justice. She had been there so many times in the past weeks, but today felt different. Sebastian was waiting for her at the entrance, his expression serious, but with a glint of something hopeful in his eyes. What's going on? Clara asked, stepping toward him. Sebastian didn't answer right away. Instead, he gestured toward the entrance of the building. Come inside. There's someone you need to talk to. Clara followed him, her mind racing with questions. They walked down the long hallway, passing by the portraits of board members and donors. When they reached the large conference room, Clara's breath caught in her throat. Inside, sitting at the head of the table, was Victor Archer. He looked tired, older than she remembered, but there was something softer in his expression, something that hadn't been there before. Clara, Victor said, standing as they entered the room, I wanted to speak with you. Clara exchanged a glance with Sebastian, unsure of what to expect. Mr. Archer, she began, her voice cautious. What's this about? Victor gestured for her to sit, and she did, though her nerves were on edge. I owe you an apology, he said, his voice steady but tinged with regret. For everything that happened, for how your mother was treated. I was blind to Beckman's corruption for too long, and because of that, your family suffered. I'm truly sorry. Clara's heart tightened, emotions swirling inside her. She had fought so hard for this moment, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure how to feel. I appreciate that, Mr. Archer, but it doesn't change what happened to my mother. Victor nodded solemnly. No, it doesn't, but I want to make things right. I've spoken with the board, and we've decided to officially clear your mother's name. Her record will be restored, and the foundation will issue a public statement acknowledging Beckman's role in the scandal. Clara's breath caught. It was more than she had hoped for, more than she had ever expected. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Victor smiled faintly. It's the least we can do. And there's one more thing. He glanced at Sebastian, who gave a slight nod. We'd like to offer you a position here at the foundation, a chance to continue your mother's work. Clara blinked, stunned. You want me to work here? Victor nodded. We need someone with your determination, your integrity. The foundation is being rebuilt, and we need people we can trust. People like you. Clara's mind raced. It was an incredible offer, but part of her hesitated. Could she really step into her mother's shoes? Could she work in a place that had caused her family so much pain? Sebastian, sensing her hesitation, spoke up. You don't have to decide right away, but I think you'd be a great fit here, Clara. You've already proven that you care about this place, about making it better. Clara met his gaze, her heart swelling with gratitude. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. That evening, Clara and Sebastian walked through Central Park, the crisp autumn air swirling around them. They hadn't spoken much since leaving the foundation, but the silence between them was comfortable, filled with the weight of everything that had happened. Are you going to take the job? Sebastian asked finally, his voice soft. Clara sighed, her breath visible in the cool air. I don't know. It's a lot to think about. I mean, part of me wants to do it, to carry on my mother's legacy. But another part of me is scared. What if I can't do it? What if I fail? Sebastian stopped walking, turning to face her. You won't fail, Clara. You've already proven how strong you are. You fought for the truth, even when it seemed impossible. That's what this foundation needs, someone who cares enough to fight. Clara smiled, though her heart was still heavy with uncertainty. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Sebastian's expression softened. Maybe, but you didn't need me. You're the one who made this happen, Clara. You're the one who never gave up. They stood there for a moment, the city bustling around them, and Clara realized how much she had changed since this journey began. She had come so far, but there was still more ahead. What about you? Clara asked, her voice quiet. What's next for you? Sebastian shrugged, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. I'm not sure. I've been thinking about stepping away from the foundation for a while. It feels different now. Clara's heart tightened at the thought of him leaving, but she understood. He had been through just as much as she had, and his world had been turned upside down too. You'll figure it out, she said, her voice filled with warmth. You always do. Sebastian smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I hope so. A few days later, Clara stood in front of her mother's grave, the cool wind brushing against her skin. She held a single white rose in her hand, her heart heavy but full of peace. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions, but now, standing here, she felt like she could finally breathe. I did it, Mom, she whispered, placing the rose on the headstone. I cleared your name. I made sure the truth came out. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of closure. I miss you every day, Clara continued, her voice soft. But I know you're proud. I know you'd be happy with how things turned out. She stood there for a moment longer, letting the silence wash over her, before turning to leave. As she walked back to her car, she felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. When she reached the car, Sebastian was waiting for her, leaning against the hood with a gentle smile. Ready to go? He asked. Clara nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude for this man who had stood by her through everything. Yeah, I'm ready. A week later, Clara stood in her new office at the Archer Foundation. The sun streamed through the large windows, casting a warm glow over the room. She hadn't planned on taking the job so soon, but after some soul-searching, she had realized that this was where she was meant to be. As she organized the papers on her desk, there was a knock on the door. Clara looked up to see Marcus standing in the doorway, a grin on his face. Look at you, Marcus said, stepping inside. Big boss lady already. Clara laughed, shaking her head. I'm just getting started. Marcus smiled, his eyes filled with pride. You're going to do great things here, Clara. I can feel it. Clara's heart swelled with determination. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to face it head-on. With the foundation behind her and the truth finally out in the open, she felt like she could conquer anything. As Marcus left, Clara sat down at her desk, taking a deep breath. She glanced at the picture of her mother on the corner of the desk, a sense of peace settling over her. For the first time in a long time, everything felt right.